Hey guys, Ryan Fowler from the FoxSports.com Fantasy Department with your top 3 fantasy football wide receivers for the 2013 season. Begin at the top, and no real big surprise here. Megatron Calvin Johnson. In 2012, he averaged nearly 14 fantasy points per game, had 122 receptions, 205 targets, are you kidding me? Over 1,900 receiving yards, but only 5 touchdowns. Now, he led all wide receivers in fantasy points scored back-to-back seasons, but he reports last year he played with some severely injured fingers. Now, they never said that they were broken, but it was definitely something to monitor considering all the production he had when his fingers, his digits, were not healthy. Probably a first-round pick, usually falls somewhere between the 10th and 12th overall pick in fantasy drafts. He's a top 10 in receiving yards 3 straight seasons. Megatron, Calvin Johnson, your top fantasy wide receiver. Number 2, Brandon Marshall. He averaged 13.5 fantasy football points per game, 118 receptions, 194 targets, so only 11 fewer than Calvin Johnson. Over 1,500 receiving yards and 11 touchdowns. Now, those 11 touchdowns, 4th in the NFL among wide receivers. Obviously, Jay Cutler, Brandon Marshall, they had that chemistry in Denver. They reconnect in Chicago. Now this year, heading into 2013, new coach, Mark Trestman. How does that affect everything? Remember, Jay Cutler was sacked a bunch last year, and still, Cutler and Marshall were able to connect. Believe it or not, Matt Forte, the running back, was the 2nd leading receiver on the Bears last year. So again, it's Marshall's team. Alshon Jeffrey will be in the mix, and they brought in Martellus Bennett, a new tight end. So it might remove a few targets, but there's no doubt Jay Cutler is going to target Brandon Marshall. He's number 2 on fantasy wide receivers. And rounding out the top 3, Larry Fizgerald, a blast from the past. In 2012, he only averaged 6.5 fantasy points per game, 71 receptions, 153 targets, but less than 800 receiving yards and only 4 touchdowns. Andre Roberts actually finished with 5 touchdowns for the Cardinals last year. But again, you remember the quarterbacks he's had to deal with. Kevin Cobb, Skelton, Ryan Lindley, and Brian Hoyer last year. So not the Kurt Warner that he fell in love with when Anquan Boldin and him were doing work in the desert. Now in comes Carson Palmer. Here's the good news. Palmer comes into an offense, and again, Arizona allowed the most sacks in the NFL last year, but Palmer comes in, he threw for over 4,000 yards and 22 touchdowns with Oakland. Oakland's leading receiver last year was Brandon Myers, their tight end. So Palmer comes in, has a top target to work with, and again, I think if he can stay upright and that pass protect can help Palmer stay upright, Larry Fizgerald will be back in for a big season, over 1,000 receiving yards and creeping close to 10 touchdowns. I like the Palmer and Fizgerald combination in 2013. FoxSports.com fantasy football registration is open and ready for you. Visit FoxSports.com/fantasy/football to sign up for a team and join a league today. Until next time, I'm Ryan Fowler for FoxSports.com.